how we describe like neurodivergence, I don't know, will be appropriate, like in the not too distant future.
Could it be that when we actually truly understand wired differently, that the wired differently is the dominance, that we actually, as a race, we survive because of wired differently, and therefore actually being dull and boring and not being wired differently may actually be the minority.
Also, if anyone's read like my book, Find Your True Voice, that's endorsed by Paloma Faith, endorsed by Sophie Ellis-Bextor. They all have this incredible creativity, and for me, creativity is such a overlooked and vital part of what makes us happy as human beings.
On a filming day like this, and if I'd been a fly on the wall watching this 5 years ago, I'd be like, you're doing that because this was a fear.
Yeah.
You lean into it, you grow, and you're brave at the same time.
It's resistance that's the most painful thing, I think, with anything. You surrender, and I think everything else lets in, then love, light, you're able to let go.
So don't be frightened to embark on that surrender process.
Well, you can be frightened, that's all right, you just need to be brave. Brave only exists in the face of fear.
Emmy Brunner, welcome. Can you tell a little bit about yourself, just for context?
Yeah, so I'm a clinician, and I set up Europe's first trauma-focused facility for women, and I ran that for 17 years. During that time, I also trained as a hypnotherapist and as a coach, and then shifted to working with high performers and entrepreneurs, helping them to adjust their mindset in order to scale and build businesses.
Thank you for that.
I grew up in the music industry, so predominantly a lot of my clients were around music, either facilitating the careers of other artists or artists themselves.
I want to make this conversation about Emmy, but also there must be such kind of rife neurodivergence in all the sort of number of the clients you work with and the industries you've been involved in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to think about this a little bit differently. I think even at how we describe like neurodivergence, I don't know, will be appropriate, like in the not too distant future. I think it's really limiting to think that there is one way of being, and that if you are not that way, that you are divergent somehow. Seems bizarre to me.
It's almost gone quite a long way down that scale. More recently, it almost become, I don't want to say fashionable, but there are people that are wearing it as, this is called Beyond the Label, and almost wearing it as a label.
I think there's just one uniform way of educating people and getting people to think. And if your brain doesn't work like that, then it's like, oh, you are other somehow. And it's such a limiting but almost bizarre way of thinking about things, that there is one way of learning. Even yesterday, I was talking to somebody, and she's doing some new training, and she was saying she was finding it really, really hard to follow the text. And I said, well, how do you best receive information? She said, I'm visual, I like watching things. I was like, well, then you just need to ask for recorded versions of this and watch it. You're going to integrate it more easily. And so it's being able to adapt like different ways of receiving information that suit the way that we think. And I think particularly artists seeing that all the time, that they're thinking in a different way. But creativity becomes so integrated in how they live. And I think it's such a good tool for being able to communicate, find different ways of expressing things, of learning things that are a break from some of those uniform ways we've been taught to learn.
It's an interesting perspective that has an incredible validity. Mm-hmm. And I've said this week in your company on a number of occasions, why is being wired slightly differently the divergence? Mm-hmm. Why is that a negative statement? Mm-hmm. Could it be that when we actually truly understand wired differently, that the wired differently is the dominance, that we actually, as a race, we survive because of wired differently, and therefore actually being dull and boring and not being wired differently may actually be the minority. And and if we did that, if we just did that as an experiment and made those people who aren't neurospicy the disordered people, those people who have something wrong with them, to use expressions that are used to describe things like ADHD, how that would change their optics on things very quickly. So the music industry, for example, we're having a lot of conversations at the moment about the music industry and the creative arts and supporting people in the arts a lot more. If that's not difference, if that's normal, whatever that is, then why are we stigmatizing it? Maybe there has to be a label for clinical work, but beyond that, what is that label? ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And we've had guests on here who argued that it's disordered because it's not normal. I get that, but why? If that makes somebody, my point being, if that makes someone feel there's something wrong with them, we're on the wrong footing from the get-go, aren't we? And I think times are changing.
Yeah.
How do you, in your work, where do you see things like ADHD in your work, and how do you position that with an individual?
I think I really resist even having those conversations, to be honest, about labelling somebody, and then certainly calling any sort of neurodivergence any kind of disorder, I think is bizarre and inappropriate. And I think it makes somebody feel like they have to resist or manage a part of their brain that actually is probably a real asset to them if they're able to embrace other different kind of core skills. So for me, it's like amplifying those other parts of them that they're perhaps not nurturing. And when they amplify those, then actually a lot of the challenges that they find from having a busy mind or whatever it is become way more manageable. I think, John, you were saying I don't write anymore. So one of the first things I'll get people to do is start writing again, because it uses a different part of your brain and it allows you have to slow down. And I also get people to walk slower. Literally, you have to walk slower. And so part of it is giving us time to then process some of what our brain's very good at digesting quickly. And it's almost like our physicality then has to keep up with the pace that our minds are able to process things. And so for me, it's been a tool of, I guess, thinking about how I show up in the world by walking slower, talking slower, not interrupting people because I've already figured out what they're going to say and want to finish that sentence, having the patience and the respect to kind of not fill space and to go, I don't need to rush this. I can take my time and enjoy it. And then in that space that I create for myself and for the people that I work with, something different has time to evolve.
Something else would fill that space.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel so calm when I talk to you. We had a conversation before today where 5 minutes in, heart rate slowed down, my brain slowed down. I instantly resisted interrupting you mid-flow because, or not just because you said it, but also because you're allowing, there's a sort of pace you go at. I feed off that. Is that a trained skill? Is that something that Emmy has learnt to be able to help other people? Because it's infectious. I can feel it.
I think part of it comes from growing up in an environment with some really big characters. Like, I'm never competing to take space. So I'm never trying to make my voice heard above anybody else's. I'm very good at listening. And I think part of that comes from just my childhood experience of being very vigilant of what was going on around me. So I'm very good at being quiet. I'm very good at listening, and I'm very good at allowing people to play something out so that I can observe exactly what's going on. And as a clinician, that's been a really important tool, because so much of what you pick up on is not what people are telling you necessarily, it's what they're not telling you and how they're responding. And you need to be really tuned into that and have patience to see that evolve. And when you're busy either filling space with your own agenda or feeling like you've got something compelling that needs airing, it gets in the way. And I think so much of what I would prefer to do is to sit back and listen and then make a more, I guess, educated observation as something or someone.
Yes, because a lot of the people that will come to you are, you said, high performing, like they're the sort of some of the highest performers. And we were talking before about client confidentiality, and you actually chose to name some people. Maybe we do that now to give context to some of the people that you work with that are operating at such a high level and have got such a pace, and then how you're able to help them slow that down. And again, where that brings in potential ADHD character traits that you can then manage and ultimately give advice on.
Yeah, I think I've worked with such a huge roster of artists over the years. In the beginning of my career, when I was doing my clinical training, I was working at the record labels. So I think part of that was securing a lot of just friendships and loyalty for what is a really, I guess, sensitive industry in terms of people being vulnerable and people sharing things. And I was able to create an environment of trust, I think, because during that time these were friends and not just colleagues. And so over the years, I've had the privilege of working with and connecting to different people. So if anyone's read like my book, Find Your True Voice, that's endorsed by Paloma Faith, endorsed by Sophie Ellis-Bextor, endorsed by Katie Piper, who's not in the industry, but again, just another amazingly creative, special person. And I think all of these people, and amongst many others that I work with, is they all have this incredible creativity. And for me, creativity is such a overlooked and vital part of what makes us happy as human beings. And it's something that is either used for work or it's thought of as a hobby rather than an integral way of how you navigate life's challenges. And so for me, having this, what I call ventivity, which is a state of mind where you are nurturing and focusing on intimacy, vulnerability and creativity, is fundamental to your kind of source of happiness and contentment, professionally and personally. And they're three things that most people neglect. Even if you're a creative person, you get pulled into an industry and that creativity becomes work, which gets tied to external validation and significance. And so your freedom to be creative gets diminished because it becomes tethered to somebody else's praise or support of that in whatever form that takes.
Which is dangerous, right?
Well, yeah, but it diminishes it. So people then hold back, and the whole link, that kind of intimacy, vulnerability and creativity is like a loop. They rely on one another to be able to exist, fully exist. So you can't be really creative without being vulnerable, for example.
It's really interesting. I pick up on conversations we're having with other people about supporting musicians. There's a confidence that the musical world as one aspect of the creative arts contains lots of people who are neurodivergent. And it's questionable to what extent the industry, if that is a thing, if that is a body as such, but organisations within the music industry is equipped at the moment to support young entrants into that industry and equip them to survive the needed resilience of a workplace that picks you up and puts you down with great frequency, perhaps more frequency than many other workplaces.
There's a lot of rejection, right?
Yeah.
A lot of judgment.
Even in success, there's rejection. You write 10 songs and only 3 of them get picked. You've got 7 rejections. How does one deal with those levels, even though you've had 3 picked? How are you working with the vulnerability of creative people then to give them that? Can you give people that resilience? That's the key question, I think.
I think when your sense of self-worth is tethered to anything external, it's fragile, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if your sense of self-worth is rooted in something that is not externally derived, then you can ebb and flow and you can experience disappointment, but it's not going to crush you in the same way. And I think historically in music, there wasn't a respect for that, and particularly with young people being exploited and bought. So I worked with recently a boy band who heritage act called Five, who had huge success in the 90s and early noughties, and it disappeared almost overnight. And they were extremely challenged and traumatized by that entire experience. And because of my relationship with the industry and particularly the management, that then brought them on to what's now been a very successful reunion tour, hugely successful, has been about helping them to strengthen their lines of communication amongst each other, helping them to think about how their, I guess, sense of self-worth and self-confidence is established and then maintained and nurtured, if not through these milestones.
Untethering it.
Yeah, exactly. And listen, some of this is not entirely possible because we have egos and we like to feel significant no matter who we are, but you can get that significance in different ways, so it's not all resting on the outcome of one particular thing. And I think as well, allowing people to establish ultimately a bit of faith where you have a sense of purpose and belonging to something that isn't necessarily resting on what you've decided the outcome needs to be, that could be multiple outcomes, some of which you'll be aware of and some of which you'll have no idea of. And being able to kind of ebb and flow with that frees you up, I think, particularly creatively, to take more risks or be more vulnerable, because ultimately you've got a sense that everything will be all right and that your real focus is going to be on relationships and who you choose to share your life with.
Not on that song that's been written, whether or not it's accepted or not.
Of course.
Where are you positioned as a human? What can you take from that gives the rewards of life? And that's really starting to resonate as we explore it in the bigger picture of things like rejection sensitivity for people. We've all got we're all sensitive to rejection. There is a strong argument that people who are neurodivergent, especially those with ADHD, have more sensitivity, mainly because they've gone through a longer life pattern of more extreme, almost traumatizing rejection, to the point where we're now discussing whoever, whenever. But you fascinate me there with, don't tether it to an event you can't control. Tether your reward mechanisms to things that are closer to being within your control. And then you will, I guess, without training people to be resilient, which is impossible, people will become more resilient because they are closer to controlling their destiny, as opposed to anchoring it on things they can't control.
Trying to control it.
Well,
letting it go completely.
Yes.
So letting go, recognizing control is just our way of trying to stay safe. And our little safe part of us is not going to want us to expand and be creative and be vulnerable. They're going to want to stay small and quiet, and because it's part of our survival to do that.
There's a connection between creative arts, the mere nature of the word creative. You're creating something that may or may not go well. It may or may not be accepted. And therefore there is a vulnerability for the creator. But if we're not strong enough to be vulnerable, we won't create.
There's a fear element though.
Yes.
We should be fear of rejection,
compromise creativity.
But humans are creators.
Yes.
So it's not reserved for a creative community who happen to have creative jobs in the arts. It's something that as human beings, we are here to create. So literally creators of life, and to everything in this room, everything around us is started with a thought or an idea that somebody had. And it might be that somebody creates something literally in form, or it could be that somebody creates a community. It could be that someone creates a sense of something, a feeling. Like, there are so many different forms of that. And I think trying to extend people's understanding of what it means to be creative, it's more of a way of thinking than of doing. And I think it then influences how we show up. But how many more people would be, you were talking earlier, I think, about people being a little bit more, I guess, pedestrian in the way that they think, and I think you said maybe a bit boring. And how many of those people actually have real creativity and real potential for divergence, but because they've learnt to be safe and small and quiet, they've settled for stability and certainty. And so they don't challenge things, people, the status quo. They stay in their lane. And I think those of us that don't, for whatever reason, because we're compelled, because we're trying to escape something, because we feel an urge to create something. And I think that's where the links between our experience and how our brains end up forming is significant. So I don't necessarily think that ADHD is a result of trauma, but I think it's amplified by the experiences we have because it's part of our survival strategy.
That's amazing articulating. Yeah. Can we link that to you now? So that we're all creators. You have created a business that helps people. I want to know where that came from and a little bit about your sort of journey into that, the sort of the why, if you like.
I think, honestly, in the very beginning, I think it was a really codependent response to being a real caretaker in my family dynamic and having other challenging scenarios that I had to navigate and be groomed to take care of and rescue family members. So I was very good at looking after people. And I was also very hypervigilant. So I would pick up on things extremely quickly for safety, in order to stay safe. And so those kind of adaptations suited a career as a psychotherapist, which is all I thought I was going to be. I just thought I was going to be a therapist and I would see people in a clinical practice and that would be it. And then as soon as I started working, I felt like there were some real fundamentals wrong with how we're taught as clinicians. I felt like there was so much more to everything. And that actually what becomes pathologized are very normal human adaptations to challenging behavior, and that there is almost no example of somebody who becomes mentally unwell who hasn't experienced significant trauma. It's how we respond to those traumas that influences our mental health. But particularly over the last 20 years, people are told that they have anxiety, that it's something that they need to live with, to manage, and I just didn't believe that. I still don't believe that. I think anxiety is fear. I think people get used to being scared. They get triggered a lot and they go, I'm an anxious person. It's like, you're not an anxious person, you're a frightened person. And when we make the world feel safer to you, your anxiety will diminish. And it did, and it does. And I ran that, eventually became a huge part of my world, because this community that I built just kept expanding, to the point where we ran that for 17 years. And we were the first trauma-focused facility. Before then, it was depression, anxiety, all the symptoms. And I started to treat that as a symptom rather than a problem. The problem was trauma. And what was the outcome? The outcome was all these symptoms. It wasn't enough to manage the symptoms. You needed to treat the problem. And somebody said to me once, what's the common theme with all these people that come into treatment? And I really thought about it. I thought, there are people who struggle to build or maintain intimate relationships with other people. Intimacy for me was everything. They couldn't be intimate. They couldn't be intimate with themselves. They couldn't be intimate with others because they could not bear to be seen. It was too painful. And therefore they couldn't be vulnerable. And they certainly weren't creative. And these were kind of the three things that I then was like, well, hang on, if you could allow that, if you could facilitate that, what would happen? And so a lot of it was trial and error, bringing in different things and seeing what people responded to. And the creative piece was incredible, absolutely incredible, the response and the healing that came when you gave people an opportunity to express and to feel safe enough to do that. And so kind of weaving in these other pathways and being entirely loving and nurturing to people, guess what? Makes people get better. And so much of the kind of clinical world was so opaque. It was so kind of withheld. It was timed. It was, don't touch me. I'm not allowed to touch you. It's that I can't share anything about my story. It's not appropriate. And I was like, where's the human connection in all of this?
And we need that, right?
And we need it. People need to know what my story was, and they need to know why I'm here and why I care beyond what the hour on the clock is and how long we've got to process whatever it is coming up for them. And so building that community kind of just transformed everything for me. But then for years, just researching and kind of honing down on these three things, it became clear to me that if you make them your focus, which nobody does, because we spend our time focusing on what's wrong in our lives and what we want less of, not what we want more of. I want to feel less stressed. I want to feel less anxious. I want to feel less frantic. Rather than I want to feel more intimate. I want to feel more vulnerable in my relationships. I want to feel more connection. People don't think like that. It doesn't occur to them.
Let's restate those three things, because we talked about them right at the start, and I want those three things, which are the perspectives you're bringing to the table. I don't want to get them to get lost in discussing them. Let's relabel them as chapter headings if we can for the conversation.
So it's a concept that I've trademarked, called Vintivity, and it's creativity, intimacy, and vulnerability, and they are your North Star.
Yeah, it makes so much more sense now. It's weird, even though you explained at the time that unraveling and that last piece forms a circle around them.
Yeah.
How do you will know the answer to this question, and I'd like you to articulate it if you can. Those three North Star elements, and for a community of people with ADHD, why are they I'm violently agreeing with you. It's not a challenging question. Why are they so important for people who've had that traumatized struggle all of their life to get to the point where they're asking the question about how do I go forward?
Because so much of, I think, of what happens because of culturally what we're set up for, it's about trying to fit in and it's about trying to conform to something. And when you start to focus your intention on something that is internally derived, you're able to connect with it. You're able to find presence. You're able to find a sense of, I guess, like love and light and something that comes from you rather than something that is conditional on somebody else's approval or validation of you. And so it just gives you so much freedom.
And again, violently agreeing with everything, saying this is really resonating with me and all the work I've done over the years with ADHD. How do we prevent that being interpreted or being behaved and played out as what could become an arrogance that the only thing that matters is how I feel about myself? Because you will be doing that with people. We're not turning people into arrogant people that don't give a damn about external.
I don't think it is just about yourself. I think it's about recognizing that how I treat myself is also how I treat you. How you treat yourself is how you treat me. Like that we are intricately connected as human beings, and we live in a world that encourages us to think in these kind of polarized, fractured ways. And actually, that's not the case at all. And when you start to think about how your behavior and your choices of how you treat yourself are like a ripple on a pond. They affect everybody, not just the people you know, but people that you have never met in the world. And you start to think about your decision to treat yourself with kindness and love and respect as a decision to treat all mankind, as a decision to foster love and respect. I think it does exactly that. I think it changes how you show up, and I think having the patience to look people in the eye, to acknowledge people, to thank people, happens more fluidly when you show up with more love and kindness to yourself. I think arrogance is a completely fear-based state.
Yes.
I don't think it's a loving state. I think it's a self-protection.
Yeah. I was going to use the word protection in terms of exposing your vulnerability. A lot of people won't expose their vulnerability through fear. And I think a lot of people with ADHD who have never understood themselves, been prepared to explore their own vulnerability, their own intimacy with themselves, being intimate with yourself and knowing yourself is full of barriers and full of previous put down, previous criticism, previous failure, to the point where the norm becomes not to reveal any of that. And that risk is felt to be so high, it's too high. So I've got to go into a defense mode, a mask mode. And I'm fascinated by what you're saying. And clearly the professional world that you bring to people's table is giving them the skill set to move beyond that barrier and move forward with their own intimacy with themselves.
You should open up creativity again as well.
Well, that's the point.
Ego's at the heart of that, which is the arrogant piece.
Yeah.
And that you must have experience where people have come in and they're incredibly high-performing, talented talent, and battling all the insecurities and all the sort of vulnerability that goes behind it to then put ego at the front. And you've got to break through that. And that transcends to so many people from a neurodivergent point of view and ADHD point of view as well. So the relatability of that for me is massive.
Yeah, it's huge.
And a lot of them are actually underperforming.
Yes.
So even though they're maybe top of their game seemingly, they're actually underperforming because they are hiding so much of what they're capable of. And I think as human beings, we all want acceptance, right? We all want love. We just want to feel like we're good enough. And I think because of culturally all of those adaptations somebody with that kind of mind makes, that it's a lack of confidence then to kind of bring your full self. And so for me, it's about turning back inward, having that conversation of self-discovery. And I always call it like taking a compassionate inventory. Where can you see you have been limited? Where can you see that these patterns are playing out where you get so far and then pull back? I think, in these patterns of self-sabotage that so many of us have, not as a kind of stick to beat yourself with, but just as a curious compassion to start to understand who you are and what you might need in order to then grow. Because it's never what people think it is.
It must have helped you masses as well as Emmy by going through clearly a lot of your own trauma, your own lived experience, to then be professionally educated to help others, which in some ways almost like a kind of self-therapy.
Yeah, like it's humbling for sure. And I think anytime I need to feel brave, I remind myself of how brave people are that I speak to, how vulnerable they're prepared to be. And it makes me step up, in those moments. And whenever I'm running a cohort, an online program, I'll always say to people that I never would have been brave enough to do what they're doing, because they're terrified at the beginning of what that's going to bring up and what that's going to mean for them and how that might change their lives. And I always let people know that I never would have done it, because I wouldn't have been brave enough. And so if they can do it, then they're already braver than me, which is good. If
you had, without placing all of your personal toolkit, your professional toolkit laid bare on the table, as a final piece for people who will be watching this programme who have an interest in ADHD, they'll have an interest in what we're trying to achieve with removing the shame and changing the narrative of understanding ADHD, and you've been hugely impactful with that over the last half an hour. What would be your one top tip for somebody watching this programme to leave them with, who may be presenting to themselves or to others with those fears, those challenges, that what would be your one thing you would say to somebody that you cared for is their next thing?
Probably that you are not a problem to be fixed. Like that actually your perception is everything. And that somewhere a soul chose this life, and that soul might be very brave. That soul did choose it. And so when you start to embrace that and think that maybe you're exactly where you're meant to be and that this is the life you're meant to have, I think it helps us to surrender a little bit. And as soon as we surrender, it's resistance that's the most painful thing, I think, with anything. You surrender, and I think everything else lets in, then love, light, you're able to let go. And that's when the magic happens, I think.
So don't be frightened to embark on that surrender process.
Well, you can be frightened. That's all right. You just need to be brave. Brave only exists in the face of fear. So we only need bravery when we're frightened. I'm scared all the time, but I'm very brave. It's one of my favourite things about myself.
That leads to growth as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course.
I was having a chat with someone off camera on a filming day like this, and if I'd been a fly on the wall watching this 5 years ago, I'd be like, you're doing that because this was a fear.
Yeah.
And you lean into it, you grow, and you're brave at the same time. It's a powerful message to convey.
It's a great message to film on. Bravery in the face of self-challenge and self-brought about challenge. Brilliant to talk to you. You've really opened my mind.
I feel so relaxed and calm now.
Yeah.
You're
on beta blocker, aren't you?
No, I don't know about that, but
great stuff. Thank you for making it. We know how busy you are,
and
you made time for this. So heartfelt thank you for.
Yeah, of course. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.